Hello, my darlings. I'm very excited to be talking to you again today. Now, as promised, I said I would come on here and share an update of my experience of wearing a continuous glucose monitor. By way of reminder, this is the one that I went for, the Freestyle Libre 2, made by Abbott. I picked this up in Boots for £51.74. You can also get it from the Abbott website and other pharmacies as well. People who are diabetic get this on the NHS if you're eligible in the UK. But I'm not. And as I mentioned last time, I wanted to wear this to see how my body responds to different foods and whether my glucose levels are a little bit high. I suspected they were. And I don't know if that's because I had gestational diabetes when I had my son, that I'm prone to slightly higher glucose levels. I don't know if it's because for a massive chunk of my life I kind of lived in a high cortisol fight or flight state, which will affect my glucose and insulin, because cortisol and insulin are very closely linked. It could also be good old perimenopause, because our cells become less resistant to insulin, so the cells aren't sucking up as much glucose as they once did, because that's what insulin does. Remember, it pushes glucose, it takes glucose out of the blood and pushes it into your cells, either for storage or for use. So, and that's what this is measuring. It's measuring the levels of glucose in your blood. So today was the day. I've worn it for 2 weeks now. This only lasts for 2 weeks, which is just as well. Because when I was in the gym this morning, I was doing like a tricep thing, not a tricep dip. I can't remember the name of that. I can never remember the name of the exercises. Bloody hurt. But it involved me putting the back of my arms in kind of this position, and I managed to knock the glucose monitor on the little bench. So it stopped working there and then. So I'm just going to take it off. I mean, the needles pretty much come out, I think, anyway. Ooh! Oh, look, it's all hanging off. Oh my goodness, that was absolutely nothing. Oh, and the needle is bent. I don't know if you can see that. Is it sticky? Slight little bit of sticky residue. I'll get that off in the bath or the shower later. I've had a really wonderful experience with this. Since I put it on, I've not noticed it. It's caused me absolutely no pain. It's not interfered with anything, apart from today when I knocked it at the gym. That was the first time. I go to the gym 3-4 times a week. I've really not noticed it. So really good experience from that point of view. And a really good experience to know how my individual body responds to different foods and responds to exercise and basically what it's doing, because we're all different. And I think we forget that sometimes, and I certainly forget that. There are so many kind of influencers and people on social media saying, no, you must eat like that. No, you must eat like this. No, you must eat like this. And you kind of, I remember like a few years ago, I felt like my head was going to explode because I wanted to find the one perfect way to eat, which I thought was the same for everybody, and that just isn't the case. We are so different and unique. The fancy term is bio-individual. I learned that on my IIN course. We're all so different and we all have different needs. So, what my body needs is different to what another person needs, and how my body responds to glucose is different to the next person as well. So, what did I learn from this experience? I learned lots of things. I learned that my levels are a bit higher than I want them to be. And just to kind of talk about levels and numbers and technical things. So in the UK, we measure blood glucose in a unit called millimoles per litre, and that's written mmol, all in small case, /L for litre. In the US and various other countries, they use milligrams per decilitre, so mg, small case, /d, capital L. And to get from one to the other, you take the millimoles per litre and you times it by 18 to get the milligrams per decilitre. So if you hear kind of, American people speaking about glucose and glucose levels, the numbers are always going to be higher. They kind of talk about 100, 125. You kind of not consider diabetic in the US until your levels are 126. But what does that equate to in the UK? So the NHS guidelines are, if your levels are between 4 and 5.4 millimoles per litre, and I won't say that word again, I'll just talk about the numbers. So if it's between 4 and 5.4, that's considered normal. And I hate that word, normal. If you are between 5.5 and 6.9, that's considered pre-diabetic. And if you are 7 and above, then that is considered diabetes. And here I'm only really talking about type 2 diabetes. Type 1 diabetes is an entirely different beast. It's an autoimmune condition. One of my absolute best friends in Switzerland, her son has type 1 diabetes, so I have a little bit of experience, not a lot, of what that is, and that is a very different thing. I'm not talking about this here. I'm talking about type 2 diabetes, which is reversible with the right lifestyle conditions. Yeah, so that's what the NHS says. So normal is 4 to 5.4. However, normal in the NHS does not necessarily mean optimal, and this is something to bear in mind whenever you're getting tests done. And it's why I would always, if you can, advise for you to go and see a functional medicine practitioner rather than your kind of conventional doctor for these tests, because your kind of your normal GP, your normal doctor just tells you what's in the normal range and what's outside of the normal range. But the normal range, all the normal range is, it's like the average. So they take the results from kind of all the people who've tested it, including all the people who are really quite poorly, and give you an average. So that does not ever give you an optimal range. It does not give you a range that means you are super duper healthy. And that's what functional medical practitioners do. They give you the optimal range. So the optimal range for blood glucose levels, and I got this from this wonderful book. It's the Glucose Goddess book. The Glucose Goddess is called Jessie Inchauspé. Pronouncing that terribly. She is French. I do apologise, Jessie. I read this book alongside wearing this continuous glucose monitor. Everyone should read this book. It really, really is so helpful and so easy to read, and has so many practical tips. It has 10 hacks basically of how you can reduce your glucose levels, and in particular your glucose spikes. So in this book she says actually an optimal range for your blood glucose is between 4 and 4.7. And all of these numbers that I've been talking about, I'm talking about your fasting blood sugar, your fasting glucose. So after you've kind of had your last meal and you fast, I can't quite remember the duration that you need to fast for to have the actual test done at the doctors or in the hospitals. It's generally about 12 hours. So if you finish eating your dinner at 7 p.m, you don't eat breakfast till 7, it's kind of the levels before you eat your breakfast. These are the fasting levels. Now, the tricky thing, and something that I didn't realise before I did this, is that when you wake up, your cortisol spikes. It's called the cortisol awakening response. If your cortisol didn't spike in the morning, you'd still be asleep. It's what literally wakes you from asleep. So your cortisol goes up, and that's why, particularly for us ladies in perimenopause and menopause, that's why we should never go straight to caffeine. Your cortisol's high anyway, and then if you slap it with a shot of espresso, it's going to soar again. Even like a milky coffee with caffeine, you should always try and wait and have your caffeine after your breakfast. There's just too much cortisol in one go. So your cortisol rises, and also your blood sugar rises as well with it. So when I was wearing this, the first thing after saying good morning to Mr. Ridley and my children if they're awake, I would check my glucose monitor to see what the levels were, like on waking basically, and it was always really high, and I was always really concerned. But then I read that's quite a normal thing as long as it comes down again, which it does. So once it had kind of come down again, my levels varied, but it was kind of knocking around the 5.5 to 6 mark. And the glucose goddess, she does say, don't get too bogged down in the numbers, but I knew my glucose levels were going to be too high, and this confirmed it for me. And I'm happy it has, because it means I'm going to adapt the way I eat according to this wonderful book and the brilliant hacks to bring that down. Yeah, so my kind of baseline was around 5.5 to 6. So other things that I learned, apart from kind of your glucose levels spiking first thing in the morning, you'll also get a glucose spike when you do exercise, particularly strength training. So on the days where I go to the gym and I lift weights, I was seeing quite a big spike in my glucose levels, even though I normally go to the gym and I haven't had anything to eat. And whether that's a good thing or not, that's also debatable. That's a chat for another day. But yeah, there was spiking, and I read again that is completely normal, because your muscles need more energy to work. So your kind of cells release glucose into your blood to kind of give you enough energy to be able to lift the weights, and then it comes down again. And what was really interesting was on the days where I did the weight training, my kind of base levels were always lower. So I'd never really get below 6 when I wasn't weight training. On the days that I did, it could come down as low as 5, which I was really happy about. And that's because your muscles can suck up, I can't remember the exact figure, like 2 to 3 times more glucose than your other cells. Your liver takes in glucose, and your fat cells obviously take in glucose. Remember, fat doesn't make you fat, sugar does. Please, please, please remember that. Fat is not the enemy. Good fats are not the enemy. Nasty fats like margarine and seed oils, no, and trans fats that are in processed foods, no. But all your lovely saturated fats, your olive oils, your avocado oil, your coconut oil, your butter, your ghee, fat is good. Yeah, so your fat cells soak up glucose, but nowhere near as much as your muscles. So the more you're kind of weight training, the bigger your muscles, the more it helps to kind of stabilise your blood glucose. And I saw that in real time with my glucose monitor, so I thought that was really interesting. What else did I want to tell you? In terms of glucose spikes, so Jessie talks a lot about spikes in here, and she said ideally you don't want to spike after you've eaten of more than 1.7 millimoles per litre. So for example, say my baseline was 6, which is high. My fasting glucose was 6. If I eat something and it goes above 7.7, that's not ideal. That's considered, if it's above 7.7, that's considered a big spike. So I just wanted to chat to you about a few things where my glucose did spike really significantly, and it really shocked me on a few occasions. So I whacked the monitor on, I can't remember what day, it must have been on the Thursday, and then on the Friday I was going to a talk at my children's school, and they always lay on like croissants, pain au chocolat, whatever, tea and coffee, and I never ever go for pastries because I tend not to. I really do try. One of the hacks that I've known about for ages in this book is that you should try and have a savoury breakfast, and I do try to embrace that. So I've not had like a croissant for breakfast for ages, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to test it. So I just had a croissant. There was no jam on it. There was a bit of icing sugar on the top. It wasn't an almond croissant. It was not a filled croissant. It wasn't particularly sweet. But remember, any white flour products are essentially sugar. It's sugar held together with string. It's not string, and the minute we kind of put them in our mouths and digest them, they turn into sugar molecules. So even though something doesn't taste sweet, like white bread and pasta, it's still sugar or starch. So I had this croissant. The talk didn't go ahead for various reasons. So I had the croissant, and then me and my friend immediately went on a walk, like an hour and a half walk. And the glucose goddess says, that's another hack. If you go for a walk, can be as little as a 10-minute walk immediately after. That helps to that helps your blood sugar not spike so much, because you're exercising, your muscles are taking up some of that glucose. So I thought, oh, it's not going to be so bad, is it, when I if I've been on this long walk anyway. Well, that was the first gigantic spike. It spiked from 5 point something to 9 point something, which was an enormous spike, even with an hour and a half walk. So that was a bit of an eye-opener. That was one thing. Then I really wanted to test pizza. So I had there's a really good sourdough, kind of like traditional Napoli pizzas. They're quite thin. They're not huge. Like, we're not talking Domino's, like this sort of size of a tray, and it had lots of protein on the top. I did have it with some cheesy dough balls, again, which I never ever order. And I just had that. I didn't have any vegetables, I didn't have any salad, which I would normally. My baseline that day, because I had been to the gym, my baseline was about 5, and that shot me up to, did it get as high as 11.4? It was literally through the roof, and it took a good while for that to come down. And then what I found on the days where I did spike, in the middle of the night, like about 3 a.m, it would spike again, even though I'm obviously, I finish eating at whatever time, 7, half 7, 8 o'clock, it would spike at 3 a.m. Now, luckily, that doesn't wake me up. But for some people, if you're waking up in the middle of the night, sometimes that's a blood sugar issue, and your blood sugar's spiking again, it then crashes, and then you can wake up because your body wants more sugar because you've crashed. So that's something to bear in mind as well. So yeah, so that was a disaster. And then a week later, I tried the same thing and had a massive bowl of salad first. And this is another of Jessie's hacks. As I say, there's 10. They're absolutely brilliant. It's really, really practical advice. So please go and buy and read this book. I had a massive salad first, and then had a pizza. I didn't have the dough balls, so not as much, not as many carbs. And I thought, right, this is going to be fine with a big salad. And it had vinegar on the salad, which also helps with glucose spikes. But it went absolutely through the roof. Not as high, so it didn't get up to like 11.5, 12. It was batting around the 9 and 10. But, from a baseline of 5.5, it was way more than the 1.7 that Jessie recommends. So it was just really, really highlighting to me that for me personally, my body is really not coping well with a lot of carbs, particularly white flour carbs like pizza and croissant. And I know, I've known for a long time myself, and I always kind of put it down to gluten because I used to bloat really badly. But because I've sorted my gut issues out, and I kind of don't bloat with those foods really anymore, I was like, can I get away with it? But I do always notice, like, if I've had too many white flour products, like, I get the odd spot, and my skin's fairly clear these days. So I knew really that I shouldn't be eating it. But it's just really highlighted what that is doing to my body. Goodness me, I've been talking for 18 minutes. I've been banging on today. Quite enjoying this chat though. I hope you are too. Yeah, and that was another thing that was highlighted in the book. Jessie did say that, my body reacts in this way. Mr. Ridley might not have the same spike. It really depends. But, you don't want to be spiking like that every day. If you're consistently spiking higher than 1.7, that's not, even if you're not diabetic, and that's a message that Jessie really wanted to bring home. Everybody used to think that if your kind of fasting glucose was fine, then it doesn't really matter what your spikes are and what's happening the rest of the time. But it's your spikes that determine how we age, like externally, like wrinkles and a loss of collagen, but also internally. It's called glycation. And she likens glycation to browning a piece of toast. Once you kind of brown a piece of toast, you can't unbrown it. You can't turn the toast. You can't turn the toast back into bread. And kind of our bodies are doing that from kind of the day they were born. Our bodies are starting to brown, and once we kind of reach maximum, you know, browning level, that's when we die. It's quite morbid. She does talk about that. So yes, so these massive spikes cause aging in the body. They cause inflammation in the body. So it's not just about having this like perfect fasting glucose level. It's about trying to keep your levels as stable as possible. And for me, on the days where I just had, you know, a savoury breakfast, I basically concentrated on protein, fats and fibre in the form of vegetables. Dead steady, no spikes, and I felt better, and I slept better, and all my levels on my Oura ring, never know how to pronounce that, were better. So all in all, it was a really fabulous experience, which I will be repeating. It'll be weird not to kind of check what my levels are doing, goodness knows how many times a day. Yeah, I just thought I'd share that experience. I hope you found that helpful. If you have any questions, do get in touch. You can either leave a comment below this video, or email me. It's jenna@jennaridley.com, or send me a DM on Instagram, Jenna_Ridley_. There we go, my darlings. Have a fabulous evening. Mwah.